There is a man in the book of Genesis who lived 969 years. Most people read that number and move on as if it were just a detail, a footnote tucked between begats and birthdays. But what if the length of his life was not a miracle in the abstract sense, not a supernatural exception, but the natural outcome of a world that had not yet forgotten how to drink? What if the liquids that passed through the lips of the patriarchs carried something that modern life has quietly removed, not through malice, but through the slow erosion of convenience and forgetting? The oldest people in Scripture were not just believers. They were drinkers of specific things, tenders of specific plants, stewards of a creation that God called very good. And buried inside that declaration was a medicine cabinet that required no prescription and no insurance. If this is something you have never heard before, make sure you are subscribed and hit the like button right now, because what comes next is the part most people never get to see. Before we go any further, take a moment to picture the world that produced these drinks. No plastic, no refrigeration, no filtration systems humming in a kitchen cabinet. What the ancient Israelites and the early followers of Christ put into their bodies came directly from the earth in its most honest form: pressed, fermented, steeped, drawn from springs, boiled over open flame. They understood, without laboratories or clinical studies, that what you drink shapes what you become. The body is not a machine running on fuel. It is a temple, as Scripture says, and temples require the kind of nourishment that honors their design. Every remedy on this list comes from that design. Every single one can be found somewhere in the pages of Scripture or in the ancient world that Scripture describes. These are not trends. They are not discoveries. They are returns. And for millions of people walking around exhausted, inflamed, and wondering why their body feels like it is working against them, a return may be exactly what is needed. We are going to walk through 10 drinks that the people of God relied on for strength, restoration, and a kind of daily resilience that we have largely stopped expecting from our food and water. Some of these will feel familiar. Others may surprise you. A few may change the way you think about what you reach for in the morning. Stay with this all the way to the end, because the last item on the list is one that almost no one talks about, and it may be the one that matters most. The first drink is one that has been called liquid gold in every culture that has ever known it. And it begins not with the liquid itself, but with the creature God chose to produce it. In the book of Proverbs, Solomon points to the bee as a model of wisdom. In Deuteronomy, God describes the Promised Land as flowing with milk and honey. Honey and water, sometimes called honey water or oxymel when combined with vinegar, was one of the most widely consumed drinks in the ancient Mediterranean world. Hippocrates, whose medicine was rooted in the same traditions that surrounded the Hebrew world, recommended it consistently. But this is not about Hippocrates. This is about what God placed inside the honeycomb. Raw honey, before it is heated and filtered and stripped of its complexity, contains enzymes, natural hydrogen peroxide in trace amounts, pollen particles, and a range of compounds that give it the remarkable property of never spoiling. Honey found in ancient Egyptian tombs was still edible thousands of years later. No other food on earth can make that claim. When you dissolve a tablespoon of raw, unfiltered honey into warm water and drink it slowly, you're giving your body a drink that supports the natural defenses of the throat and respiratory system, that provides the kind of slow, steady nourishment that does not spike and crash the way modern sweeteners do, and that brings with it the botanical signature of every flower the bees visited in producing it. The land flowing with milk and honey was not poetic exaggeration. It was a description of abundance specifically designed to support human flourishing. Drink from that abundance daily. The second remedy may be the one that surprises you most because it has been sitting in your pantry this entire time waiting to be taken seriously. Apple cider vinegar in its raw, unfiltered form is one of the oldest folk remedies on earth, but its roots are not merely in folk tradition. Vinegar appears in the book of Ruth. Boaz tells Ruth to dip her bread in the vinegar, and she eats and is satisfied and leaves some over. This is not a throwaway scene. It is a record of what working people in the ancient Near East consumed to strengthen themselves through a long day of physical labor. The strand of cloudy material that floats through raw apple cider vinegar is called the mother. It is a living colony of beneficial cultures that the fermentation process produces naturally. When you drink raw apple cider vinegar diluted in water, you are drinking something that supports the body's natural digestive process, that encourages the stomach to do the work it was designed to do, and that brings the body's internal chemistry into a more balanced state. People who have made this a daily practice for years describe a steadiness in their energy, a settling in their digestion, and a clarity that they cannot entirely explain. 2 teaspoons in a tall glass of water, drunk in the morning before food, is enough. It does not need to be a large dose. The wisdom of the ancients was rarely about excess. It was about consistency. A small, faithful daily practice carried over a lifetime produces a different body than any dramatic shortcut. Ruth ate from this table and was satisfied. That image alone should tell you something. The third drink is one that the ancient world knew as one of the most warming, most strengthening liquids a person could consume, and it comes from a root that grows deep in the earth with a quiet ferocity that matches the toughness of the people who relied on it most. Ginger root tea has been used in the ancient Near East, in the spice trade routes that connected Israel to the East, and in the medical traditions of virtually every civilization that history remembers. In the Song of Solomon, spices are celebrated as gifts worthy of the beloved. Ginger was among the most prized of those spices, carried across continents at great expense because people had learned that what it did for the body was worth the cost of the journey. When you peel and slice fresh ginger root and steep it in boiling water for 10 minutes, what you produce is a drink that carries a heat and a clarity that you feel almost immediately. It warms the chest, it settles the stomach, it cuts through the foggy, heavy feeling that accumulates in the body when the digestive system is sluggish or when the cold of the season has settled into the joints and muscles. Old farm communities across the American South and Midwest use ginger tea without thinking of it as an exotic remedy. It was simply what you made when someone was not feeling right. It was kitchen wisdom passed from mother to daughter without ceremony. The people of the spice routes paid fortunes for what you can grow in a pot on your windowsill or find for a few dollars at any market. Do not let the availability fool you into undervaluing it. Ginger is a gift from the deep earth, from the part of creation that stores its power underground where it cannot be rushed. The fourth remedy is one that requires no explanation and yet has been almost entirely misunderstood. It is water, but not water in the careless, incidental way that most people consume it today. In Scripture, water is never simply a backdrop. It is a theological statement. Moses struck a rock and water poured out into the wilderness. Jesus sat at a well and spoke of living water. The Psalms describe the soul longing for God, the way a deer pants for water in a dry land. In the ancient world, water was so precious that its source defined communities, shaped cities, and determined the survival of entire peoples. The people of Israel drew from springs and cisterns that often ran through limestone and mineral-rich rock. That water was not empty. It carried with it the minerals of the earth it had traveled through, calcium from the stone, magnesium from the deep veins of the land. Their water was alive with what the earth placed into it. Modern research on populations that drink naturally mineral-rich water shows that those communities tend to have stronger bones, steadier hearts, and more resilient overall constitutions. The body was designed to drink water that carries the signature of creation. Cold, clear, mineral-bearing water drawn close to the source is one of the most underestimated daily practices a person can return to. If you have access to a natural spring or a high-quality mineral water, drink it with intention. Drink it the way the ancients treated water, as something worth seeking, worth caring, and worth being grateful for. The fifth remedy on this list is one that grows in the wild across nearly every temperate region on Earth, and that has been gathered and steeped into drinks by people of faith for thousands of years. Elderberry has been used medicinally since before the birth of Christ. The elder tree appears in ancient European traditions and in the herbal knowledge of cultures surrounding the biblical world. In times of seasonal illness, when the cold and damp would settle into communities and move from household to household, elderberry was among the first things reached for. A tea or syrup brewed from dried elderberries carries a deep, dark, almost wine-like richness that feels nourishing before you even consider what it might be doing inside the body. The dark pigment of elderberry is the same family of compounds found in dark grapes, present in even higher concentration. When you steep elderberries in hot water and drink the resulting liquid, sometimes sweetened with a small amount of raw honey, you are giving your immune system the kind of daily support that does not announce itself dramatically, but that accumulates quietly over months and years into a kind of resilience that people notice eventually. Grandmothers who lived into their 90s on farms and in small communities were not strangers to elderberry tea. They did not call it a remedy. They called it what you drink when the weather turns. That plainness was the wisdom. It was not dramatic. It was faithful. And faithfulness in matters of the body, just as in matters of the spirit, is what produces the long harvest. The sixth drink on this list is one of the most ancient fermented foods on earth, and one that Scripture describes in a way that points directly to its daily use among the people of God. Kefir, or its closest ancient equivalent, is a fermented milk drink that traces back to the Caucasus Mountains and the nomadic cultures of the ancient Near East. The Hebrew word for milk in several passages is broad enough to include fermented milk preparations, and there is strong evidence that what Abraham set before the angels in Genesis 18, the milk described alongside the butter and the calf, was not fresh milk in the modern sense, but something closer to what we would recognize as a thick, fermented, living dairy drink. Fermented milk does something that fresh milk cannot do on its own. The fermentation process breaks down the proteins into forms that the body can absorb with less effort, and it produces billions of living cultures that travel into the digestive system and establish themselves as workers in a system that God designed to be inhabited. The gut is not simply a pipe, it is a garden, and a garden requires living things to thrive. When the garden of the gut is well tended, everything downstream improves. Energy steadies, mood lifts. The body's natural defenses become more consistent. People who have returned to drinking fermented milk in its traditional form describe a change in how they feel that they struggle to put into words, but that they refuse to give up once they have experienced it. Abraham offered this to angels without apology. If it was worthy of the messengers of God, it is worthy of your table. Which of these 6 drinks has been part of your family's table for generations? Has someone in your life, a grandmother, a great uncle, a neighbor who seemed to outlive everyone else, relied on one of these without ever calling it medicine? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and those stories are the reason this channel exists. The 7th drink is one that appears on the very first page of human civilization and runs like a thread through every culture that has ever flourished on Earth. Fermented grape drink, which Scripture calls wine, was the daily companion of the Hebrew people, and it was never the syrupy, heavily processed liquid that fills grocery store shelves today. Ancient wine was pressed by hand, allowed to ferment naturally, and consumed in a form that was alive with cultures and compounds that modern winemaking has largely processed away. The Apostle Paul wrote to Timothy and told him plainly to take a little wine for your stomach's sake. This was not a casual suggestion. Paul was acknowledging something the ancient world understood as common sense, that naturally fermented grape juice carried within it a kind of support for digestion and for the strength of the body that plain water alone could not provide. The deep red pigment of dark grapes comes from compounds that have been studied extensively in modern times, and every finding points back to something the biblical world already lived. The skin of the grape is where the power concentrates. Those compounds support the walls of the blood vessels, nourish the heart, and carry an antioxidant strength that acts like a slow, gentle shield against the kind of cellular wear that accumulates over decades. If you choose to incorporate this, choose the most natural, least processed form available to you. And if this is not something you consume, the grape itself, eaten whole with the skin, carries much of the same gift. God did not hide this in an obscure corner of creation. He put it in a fruit that grows abundantly across the Mediterranean world and that the people he loved most drank every day. The 8th remedy is one that the 23rd Psalm touches on in a way that most readers walk right past. The psalmist writes that God prepares a table before him in the presence of his enemies, that his cup runs over. The cup in that psalm and the culture that produced it was often filled with something other than water. Olive leaf tea is drawn from the same tree that produced the oil Scripture calls sacred, the oil used to anoint kings and consecrate altars, the oil whose branch the dove brought back to Noah as the first sign that the flood was receding. The olive tree is one of the longest-lived trees on earth. There are olive trees in the Garden of Gethsemane that are believed to be over 1,000 years old. Their roots go deeper than almost any other tree in the region. What the leaves of this ancient tree carry is a compound that has been studied extensively in modern times, and every finding circles back to the same truth that the ancient world expressed differently, but understood just as clearly. Olive leaf tea, steeped from dried leaves in hot water, produces a drink that is mildly bitter, earthy, and complex in a way that feels like it is doing something. People who drink it regularly describe a kind of sustained vitality, a consistency of energy and immune strength that does not depend on how the season is treating them. The olive tree does not shed its leaves in winter. It holds them. It stays green when everything around it has gone dormant, and the tea it produces carries something of that same stubborn, faithful endurance. There is a reason the olive branch is a symbol of peace and of God's favor. It is a tree that was made to last and to give. The ninth drink is one that will feel intensely familiar to anyone who grew up in a home where illness meant something other than a trip to the pharmacy. Bone broth, made from the slow simmering of bones over many hours, is mentioned in its principle in the book of Ezekiel, where the prophet uses the image of a pot set over fire with bones inside as a powerful metaphor for what the heat of refinement does to what is placed inside it. Bone broth was the foundational liquid of ancient kitchens everywhere that animals were raised and consumed. Nothing was wasted. The bones that remained after a meal were placed in a clay pot with water and whatever herbs and roots were available, set over a low fire, and allowed to draw out the deep mineral richness that lives inside the marrow and cartilage of animal bones. What is released in that long, slow process is a liquid that carries collagen, the structural protein that gives skin its resilience, joints their cushion, and the gut lining its integrity. As the body ages, its ability to produce collagen naturally slows. The people of the ancient world compensated for this not with supplements in a bottle, but with the pot that sat at the back of the fire for hours every day. They drank from it morning and evening. They used it as a base for every other liquid they consumed. It was the quiet foundation of their nourishment. When you make real bone broth simmered long enough that it gels when it cools, and you drink it warm from a mug in the morning, you are participating in a kitchen tradition that stretches back to the earliest fires of human civilization. You are drinking the wisdom of people who understood that the body is made from the earth, and that the earth, in its most elemental forms, can restore what time and effort take away. The 10th and final drink on this list is the one that almost no one talks about, and yet it may be the most theologically resonant of all of them. It is also the simplest, which is why it is so easy to overlook. The drink is warm water infused with frankincense, and its roots go deeper than perhaps any other remedy on this list. Frankincense is one of the gifts the Magi brought to the Christ child. In Exodus, God gave Moses a specific formula for sacred incense, and frankincense was listed first among the ingredients. The tree that produces it, the boswellia tree, grows in some of the harshest conditions on earth, in the dry, rocky highlands of Oman, Yemen, Somalia, and Ethiopia. It produces its resin by wounding, by slashing the bark, and allowing the tree to bleed out its precious substance in response to injury. There is a deep theology in that image if you are willing to sit with it. The most sacred thing this tree produces comes from its wound. Frankincense tears, as the solid resin pieces are called, can be dissolved in warm water and consumed as a drink, a practice that goes back thousands of years in the Middle Eastern and East African traditions that surrounded the world of the Bible. Healers in those traditions used it for everything from settling the stomach to supporting the joints, from clearing the mind to restoring ease to a body tightened by years of labor. Modern examination of frankincense resin has found compounds that interact with the body's inflammatory pathways in ways that are now generating serious attention from researchers who are, in a sense, catching up to what the ancient world already knew. When you drink warm water infused with a small piece of frankincense resin, You are drinking something that was considered holy enough to offer to a king at his birth, sacred enough to burn before the God of the universe, and useful enough to be carried across deserts by wise men who understood what it was worth. That is a remarkable pedigree for a morning drink, and yet here it is, waiting to be rediscovered by people who are willing to look back far enough to find what has been there all along. Here is what ties all 10 of these drinks together, and it is the thing worth sitting with long after this video is over. None of them came from a laboratory. None of them required a scientist to identify their value before a human being decided to try them. Every single one of them was found first through observation, through living close to the earth, through paying attention to what the creation offered and what the body did in response. The people of Scripture were, in many ways, better observers than we are. They had to be. Their survival depended on it. They watched what the animals ate. They noticed what the sick reached for. They kept records in their traditions, even when they could not write them down. And when they wrote as they did in the pages we still carry, they embedded inside the stories and the commands and the poetry a portrait of a way of living that supported long, strong, purposeful life. The patriarchs did not live long because they were lucky. They lived long because the world they inhabited had not yet been stripped of its created goodness, and because they drank from it daily with gratitude and intentionality. We live in a world that has wandered far from that table. The processed, the artificial, the convenient, these things have crowded out the ancient and the faithful in almost every corner of modern life, but they have not replaced what was placed here by design. The mineral spring still flows. The olive tree still bears its leaves. The bees still produce their gold. The ginger root still pushes through the soil with the same fierce warmth it carried in the time of Solomon. The creation has not forgotten what it was made to offer. We are the ones who have become forgetful, and forgetfulness, unlike ignorance, has a remedy. It is return. It is simply the act of turning back toward what was always true and beginning again with whatever is in your hand and whatever is in your cup. Every morning you wake up is another invitation to drink differently, to tend your body with the same reverence that you bring to your faith, to treat the vessel God gave you as the sacred and purposeful thing that it is. These 10 drinks are not a program. They are not a protocol. They are a reintroduction, a way of getting reacquainted with a pantry that God stocked before you were born and that has been waiting patiently for you to find your way back to it. Start with 1. Choose the one that spoke to you most in this list, the one that felt like a memory rather than new information. That feeling is worth trusting. It may be older than you think. If this spoke to something you already knew in your spirit, subscribe to this channel and leave a like before you go. There is more coming, rooted in the same ancient faithful soil, and you will not want to miss what is next.